The artificial gravity on the asterisk meridian had been acting up for 3 days straight, which meant Dr. Sarah Vega had been walking like a drunk astronaut for approximately 72 hours. Engineering swore they'd fixed it. Engineering was, as usual, lying through their teeth. Sarah clutched her data pad against her chest and shuffled along the corridor toward Bay 7, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity while her boots alternated between feeling too heavy and too light with each step. The samples from the Kepler 442b expedition weren't going to analyze themselves, and she'd already missed 2 deadlines because the centrifuge in Lab 3 had decided to achieve sentience and reject all her commands. She just rounded the corner where the corridor narrowed, some genius architect's idea of efficient space utilization, when the gravity hiccuped again. Not a gentle flutter, but a full-on mechanical seizure that sent her lurching forward at precisely the wrong angle, directly into someone coming from the opposite direction. The collision was inevitable. The location of that collision was cosmically unfortunate. Sarah's hand, still gripping the data pad, made contact with what was decidedly not a data pad, not a wall, and not anything she should be touching in any professional capacity whatsoever. The universe, in its infinite cruelty, had perfect timing. As the gravity normalized with a mechanical wheeze, Sarah found herself awkwardly pressed against someone, her hand still planted firmly on what she now realized was a posterior region that definitely belonged to another person. She jerked back so fast she nearly gave herself whiplash, the data pad clattering to the floor. Words tried to form in her mouth but came out as a series of incomprehensible syllables that might charitably be called language if one was particularly forgiving about linguistic definitions. The person she'd groped, and oh God, she'd groped someone, turned around with fluid grace that seemed to mock Sarah's flailing. Ambassador Lyra of the Etherian Collective stood there, tall and composed in her formal diplomatic attire that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary. Her hair, dark as deep space, fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. Her features were striking in that way that made humans instinctively shut up and stare. Sharp cheekbones, full lips, eyes like polished amber. And there, elegantly pointed and extending upward through carefully styled hair, were the long ears that marked her as decidedly not human. Sarah's brain, helpful organ that it was, chose this moment to remind her of everything she knew about Ambassador Lyra. Appointed representative of the Etherian Diplomatic Corps, royal bloodline, here to negotiate some treaty that was apparently vital to human-Etherian relations, and most importantly, known throughout the station as being about as warm and approachable as a black hole's event horizon. This was it. This was how Sarah's career ended, not in a blaze of scientific glory, but because she'd accidentally groped an alien princess in a malfunctioning corridor. They'd probably name the incident in the station logs. Future cadets would study it as a cautionary tale. Lyra's amber eyes studied Sarah with an intensity that made her want to melt into the floor panels. Sarah opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, to possibly beg for mercy or at least a quick death, but Lyra spoke first. "I like it." The words hung in the recycled air between them. Sarah's brain stuttered like the faulty gravity generator. Had she heard that correctly? Was this some kind of Etherian custom she didn't know about? Was "I like it" their version of "you're fired" and also possibly exiled to the nearest asteroid belt? "I what?" Sarah managed, eloquence abandoning her completely. A smile curved Lyra's lips, small but unmistakable, transforming her face from coldly beautiful to something that made Sarah's heart do an uncomfortable gymnastics routine in her chest. The ambassador stepped closer, and Sarah became acutely aware of how the narrow corridor left them very little space, how Lyra seemed to take up all the available oxygen despite the environmental systems working perfectly fine. "Your honesty," Lyra said, her voice carrying that melodic quality all Etherians seemed to possess, like they'd swallowed music and it had become part of their vocal cords. "The complete lack of pretense, it's refreshing." Sarah stared. Refreshing. She just committed what was probably an interstellar incident, and it was being described as refreshing, like she was a particularly invigorating beverage. I am so sorry, Sarah blurted out, finally locating her capacity for human speech. The gravity, it's been malfunctioning and I wasn't looking where I was going, and I absolutely did not mean to, she gestured vaguely, unable to actually say the words for what she'd done. Any of that. I swear it was an accident. Of course it was, Lyra said, and there was something in her tone that Sarah couldn't quite identify. Amusement. Interest. The precursor to Sarah being jettisoned out an airlock. Though I must say, in all my years of diplomatic service, I've never been greeted quite so directly. Was she joking? Sarah had attended exactly one briefing about Etherian culture before they'd arrived on the station, and she distinctly remembered the phrase, emotionally reserved, being used approximately 47 times. Nothing in that briefing had prepared her for an Etherian making what seemed suspiciously like a joke. I really am sorry, Sarah said again, because apparently her vocabulary had shrunk to endless variations of apology. It won't happen again, obviously, because I'm going to walk facing forward at all times and possibly wear proximity sensors. Lyra's smile widened fractionally. That seems excessive. She tilted her head, those remarkable ears catching the corridor's lighting in a way that made them seem to glow slightly. You're Dr. Vega, yes, the xenobiologist. The fact that Ambassador Lyra knew her name made Sarah's stomach do something complicated. Yes, Sarah, Dr. Sarah Vega, but you can call me Sarah, or Dr. Vega, or just anything that isn't the human who committed assault via gravity malfunction. I think Sarah suits you. Lyra bent gracefully to retrieve Sarah's fallen data pad, holding it out with long fingers that seemed almost too elegant for a universe this crude. I've read some of your research on adaptive evolution in low-gravity environments. Fascinating work. Sarah took the data pad, trying not to think about how Lyra's fingers brushed hers in the exchange, how that brief contact sent something electric up her arm. You've read my papers. They're incredibly boring. I put myself to sleep writing them. I found them engaging. Lyra's amber eyes held Sarah's, and there was something in that gaze that made Sarah forget how to breathe properly. Perhaps we could discuss your work sometime. I find myself curious about many things on this station. Before Sarah could formulate a response that didn't sound like the linguistic equivalent of static, Lyra stepped past her, moving down the corridor with that impossible grace. Sarah stood frozen, watching her go, catching the faint scent she left behind. Something like ozone and starlight, if starlight had a smell, which it probably didn't, but Sarah's brain wasn't working properly enough to care about scientific accuracy. Just before Lyra disappeared around the corner, she glanced back, and Sarah could have sworn she saw something in that look that contradicted everything the station gossip said about the ambassador's cold, untouchable nature. Sarah remained standing in the corridor for a full minute after Lyra vanished, her data pad clutched forgotten in her hands, her mind replaying those words. I like it. Whatever she'd expected from accidentally groping an alien princess, it definitely wasn't this. The gravity generator hummed its faulty rhythm around her, and Sarah had the distinct feeling that her carefully ordered, socially isolated life had just become significantly more complicated. Sarah had spent the last 6 hours staring at cellular samples that stubbornly refused to behave according to any known biological principles, which meant she was approximately 40% caffeine and 60% frustration when the lab door chimed. Unless you're bringing food or a new theory on why these cells keep rearranging their own DNA, go away, she called out without looking up from the microscope. I'm afraid I have neither, though I could arrange for food if you'd like. Sarah's head snapped up so fast she nearly knocked over a tray of samples. Ambassador Lyra stood in the doorway of Lab 3, looking entirely out of place among the cluttered workstations and humming equipment. Her formal diplomatic robes had been replaced with something simpler, but still elegant, deep blue fabric that made her amber eyes even more striking. Those long ears were slightly tilted forward, which Sarah's panicked brain remembered meant curiosity in Etherian body language, assuming she'd actually retained anything from that cultural briefing besides abject terror. "Ambassador," Sarah managed, standing so quickly her chair rolled backward and crashed into the counter behind her. I didn't expect, is there something wrong? Did I break some protocol? Is this about the thing in the corridor? Because I swear I've been walking very carefully and haven't accidentally touched anyone inappropriate since." "Sarah," Lyra's voice cut through her spiral gently. "You're not in trouble, may I come in?" Sarah gestured wildly at the lab, nearly knocking over a beaker in the process. "Yes, of course, please. Sorry about the mess. And the smell. That's sulfur compounds from the samples, not me. Well, probably not me. I did skip my last shower cycle, but that was for science." Why was she like this? Why did her mouth insist on sharing every thought that passed through her brain? Lyra stepped into the lab, and Sarah watched as those amber eyes swept across the space with genuine interest. "I hope I'm not interrupting critical work." "Oh no, I was just arguing with some cells that have apparently decided biological laws are optional." Sarah caught herself before she could launch into a detailed explanation that would bore even her. "What can I do for you, Ambassador?" "Lyra, please." She moved closer to Sarah's workstation, peering at the holographic display hovering above the microscope. "And I was hoping you might give me a tour of the xenobiology labs. I've been aboard the Meridian for 2 weeks now, and I've seen nothing but conference rooms and diplomatic quarters. It's remarkably dull." Sarah blinked. "You want a tour of these labs? Are there other labs I'm unaware of?" Lyra's lips curved in that small smile that did alarming things to Sarah's cardiovascular system. "No, you're here for important treaty negotiations. Aren't you supposed to be negotiating?" "Importantly, the negotiations are stalled." Lyra's expression shifted to something more guarded. "Bureaucracy moves slowly when both sides are being careful not to offend. I have 3 days before the next session, and I've been informed that walking the same corridor repeatedly is concerning behavior, according to your station's counselor." Sarah couldn't help it, she laughed. The idea of this elegant, composed being pacing corridors like a caged creature struck her as absurdly endearing. "Okay, yes, tour, I can do that. Fair warning though, I'm terrible at this. I once gave a tour to visiting students and accidentally set off the biohazard alarm. Twice. I'll consider myself warned." Lyra leaned closer to the display, and Sarah caught that scent again, ozone and something else, something that made her think of thunderstorms on planets she'd never visited. "What are these samples that have rejected biological law?" "Organisms from Kepler 442b. Sarah pulled up the data, her natural enthusiasm for her work overriding her social anxiety. "They're photosynthetic, which is normal enough, but they keep reorganizing their cellular structure based on light wavelength. Blues make them develop neural clusters. Reds trigger reproductive protocols. It's like they're deliberately adapting in real time, which should be impossible because evolution doesn't work that fast. Perhaps they're not evolving." Lyra studied the images with an intensity that suggested actual interest rather than polite diplomatic pretense. Perhaps they were designed to adapt. Sarah's hand froze over the haptic controls. "Designed? You think these are artificial?" The Etherian homeworld had similar organisms before the Great Terraforming. Ancient bioengineering projects that our ancestors created for environmental management. Lyra's ear twitched slightly. They were quite useful until they became too efficient and nearly consumed the entire northern continent. That's horrifying and fascinating in equal measure. Sarah zoomed in on a cellular structure. "Do you know what stopped them?" "Music, actually." At Sarah's incredulous expression, Lyra's smile widened into something almost playful. "Specific frequency resonances disrupted their adaptive cycles. My people spent a century developing combat symphonies before someone suggested simply talking to them. Talking to them. They were designed to respond to intelligent input. They'd simply been waiting for instructions. Lyra reached toward the holographic display, her fingers passing through the light. Have you tried communicating with yours? Sarah stared at her samples with new eyes. I've been treating them like they're stupid. Oh God, what if they're smart and I've been incredibly rude for 6 months? I doubt they hold grudges. Lyra straightened and Sarah became aware of how close they were standing, how the lab suddenly felt much smaller. Though you could apologize, it couldn't hurt. I'm not apologizing to cells. I have some dignity left. Sarah saved her data and gestured toward the door. Come on, I'll show you the really interesting labs. We've got a whole section dedicated to xenobotany that's basically a jungle. Fair warning, some of the plants are mildly carnivorous. How mildly? They mostly just bite, nothing fatal. Sarah led them into the corridor, acutely aware of Lyra walking beside her. Can I ask you something that might be incredibly rude? You've already accidentally groped me. I think we're past formality. Sarah felt her face heat up. Are you ever going to let me forget that? Absolutely not. Lyra's tone was definitely teasing now. It's the most memorable thing that's happened to me in approximately 50 years. 50 years? How old are you? Sarah immediately winced. Sorry, is that rude? That's probably rude, forget I asked. I'm 237 in your years. Lyra said it casually, like she was mentioning the weather. Young by Etherian standards, I'm considered somewhat impulsive and reckless by my people. Sarah tried to process the idea of someone who'd lived over 2 centuries considering themselves young. What's reckless to an Etherian? Smiling at strangers, expressing opinions during formal dinners, spending time with a human scientist who talks to her samples. Lyra's gaze slid sideways toward Sarah, admitting when something unexpected happens to be exactly what you needed. The corridor seemed to telescope around them. Sarah's heart was doing that gymnastics routine again, and she had no idea what to do with the way Lyra was looking at her. Like Sarah was somehow more interesting than 200 years of accumulated experience. We're here, Sarah said, her voice coming out slightly strangled. The doors to the xenobotany section hissed open, revealing a humid tunnel of green and purple vegetation that climbed the walls in defiance of gravity. Welcome to what I affectionately call the place that wants to eat us. Lyra stepped forward into the artificial jungle, and her laugh echoed through the space like wind chimes in a meteor shower. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, watching this allegedly cold and untouchable ambassador trail her fingers along alien leaves, her whole face transformed by genuine delight. Sarah was beginning to suspect that everything the crew believed about Ambassador Lyra was completely, spectacularly wrong. And possibly, terrifyingly, she was the only one who'd figured it out. The observation deck at midnight station time was Sarah's favorite place on the Meridian asterisk, mostly because nobody else came here when they should be sleeping. She'd claimed a corner near the viewport 3 years ago, and defended it with the ferocity of a territorial animal, which was why finding Lyra already sitting there sent a jolt of surprise through her tired brain. This is where you disappear to, Lyra said without turning around, somehow knowing it was Sarah approaching despite the soft-soled boots. I've been mapping your movement patterns, very predictable for a scientist. That's not creepy at all. Sarah dropped into the seat beside her, cradling a mug of something the station euphemistically called coffee. Are Etherian ambassadors supposed to stalk people? Only the interesting ones. Lyra's eyes remained fixed on the viewport, where a planet rotated slowly in shades of blue and green. I find your routine soothing. Lab from 0600 to 1400, lunch exactly 17 minutes late, back to lab until 2200, then here. Every day. I'm a creature of habit. Sarah sipped her terrible coffee. Also, are you saying I'm interesting or that you're stalking multiple people and I'm just one of many? You're the only one who makes me laugh. Lyra finally turned to face her, and in the dim lighting of the observation deck, her features seemed softer somehow, less carefully controlled. Do you know how rare that is? I've attended 412 diplomatic functions in the last decade. I've smiled exactly 0 times. That's depressing. That's duty. Lyra accepted the coffee mug Sarah offered her, taking a sip and making a face that suggested she just tasted liquid betrayal. This is genuinely awful. I know, I drink it anyway out of spite. Sarah reclaimed the mug. Want to tell me why you're really here? And I don't mean the observation deck, I mean the Meridian asterisk. The treaty negotiations are clearly a nightmare, and you seem about as happy to be here as I am to attend station social functions. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the viewport. I volunteered for this assignment. Why? Because everyone else was terrified of failure. Lyra's laugh was hollow. The Etherian collective needs this alliance with humanity. Our resources are stretched thin across too many colonies, and there are threats emerging in the outer systems that we can't face alone. But the Council couldn't decide who to send because failure would mean political ruin. So I volunteered, because I'm royal enough that my presence shows respect, but expendable enough that if I fail, it won't destabilize anything important. Sarah stared at her. That's the most messed up thing I've heard all week, and I work with carnivorous plants. It's logical. Lyra's tone suggested she'd repeated this to herself many times. I've been trained since childhood to serve my people. This is service. This is torture. Sarah set down her mug harder than intended. You're 237 years old, and you're talking like you've never done anything for yourself. I haven't. The admission came out quiet. Etherians don't. We live long lives, which means we have long responsibilities. Personal desires are considered selfish when you have centuries to serve the greater good. That's absolutely insane. Sarah twisted in her seat to face Lyra fully. What's the point of living for centuries if you spend all of it being miserable? I'm not miserable. Lyra said it automatically, then paused. I wasn't miserable before. Before what? Before you. Lyra met her gaze, and Sarah felt like she'd been hit with a gravitational wave. Before someone crashed into me in a corridor and then apologized 17 times in 30 seconds. Before someone gave me a tour of laboratories and talked to their samples like they were colleagues. Before I realized that I've spent 2 centuries being the perfect diplomat and forgotten how to be a person. Sarah's mouth went dry. The observation deck felt simultaneously too large and too small, the recycled air too thin. Lyra, I think about you constantly. Lyra continued as if Sarah hadn't spoken, words spilling out like a dam breaking. I find excuses to walk past your lab. I've read every paper you've published, even the ones from your graduate work about fungal spores that were genuinely incomprehensible. I memorized your schedule. I'm behaving like someone from one of those human romance novels that are inexplicably popular on the station network, and I can't seem to stop. Okay, Sarah's brain was moving through syrup. Okay, first, those papers were comprehensible, you just need 3 degrees in mycology. Second, you read my graduate work. Nobody reads that. I don't even read that. Third, she paused, trying to organize thoughts that were scattering like startled birds. Third, are you saying what I think you're saying? I don't know what you think I'm saying. I think you're saying you like me, in a way that isn't just friendly ambassador appreciation. Lyra's ears tilted forward, and a flush colored her cheeks that Sarah had never seen before. Your species has a talent for bluntness. Is that a yes? Yes. Lyra said it simply, and the words seemed to take physical weight from her shoulders. I like you in a way that terrifies me because I've never felt anything like it. I like how you gesture wildly when you're excited. I like how you apologize to inanimate objects when you bump into them. I like that you're brilliant and awkward and completely genuine in a universe that taught me to be none of those things. Sarah sat very still, afraid that moving might shatter whatever moment this was. I talk to my samples because I'm lonely. I work 16-hour days because I don't know what else to do with myself. I haven't had a real relationship in 7 years because everyone I meet is either intimidated by the science talk or bored by it. And I never learned how to be anything other than exactly what I am. I know. Lyra's hand moved to rest on the armrest between them, close enough to Sarah's that she could feel the warmth radiating from Etherian's skin. It's why I can't stop watching you. You're the first person I've met who seems as out of place as I feel. We're a mess. Sarah said it like a revelation, a spectacular mess. Lyra's smile was sad and hopeful in equal measure. I have to return to the negotiations tomorrow. They're calling in senior mediators from both sides. It's going to be formal dinners and political posturing, and everything I'm supposed to excel at. I'll have to be Ambassador Lyra again, cold and perfect and appropriate. But right now, you're just Lyra. Right now, I'm just Lyra, sitting with someone who accidentally touched my ass and somehow made me feel more alive than I have in decades. Sarah laughed, the sound echoing off the viewport. I'm never going to live that down, am I? Never. Lyra's hand shifted slightly, her fingers brushing against Sarah's with what couldn't possibly be accidental contact. Sarah, I need you to understand something. My people, we experience emotions differently than humans. We feel things deeply, but we're taught to bury them under layers of control. When we choose to care about someone, it's not casual. It's consuming. Are you trying to warn me or tell me something? Both. Lyra's fingers interlaced with Sarah's, and the touch sent electricity racing up Sarah's arm. I'm telling you that this thing I feel, it's not going to fade. And I'm warning you that pursuing it will be complicated. The negotiations are delicate. If anyone finds out that I'm involved with a human, someone on my diplomatic staff, it could be used as leverage. It could jeopardize everything. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between human and Etherian skin, at the physical proof that maybe she wasn't imagining this connection. So what do we do? I don't know. Lyra's thumb traced patterns on Sarah's palm. I've spent my entire life knowing exactly what to do. Right now, I have no idea, and it's absolutely terrifying. Want to be terrified together? Lyra's laugh was genuine and unguarded. I think I'd like that. They sat in silence, hands intertwined, watching the planet rotate through the viewport. Somewhere in the station, diplomats were sleeping before another day of careful negotiations. Engineers were fixing gravity generators that refused to stay fixed. Scientists were running experiments that would probably fail. And in the observation deck, two people who'd spent their lives being lonely were discovering that maybe they didn't have to be anymore. Sarah's coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. Some things were worth the sacrifice. Sarah was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning gene sequencer when her supervisor's voice crackled through the lab intercom with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a funeral. Dr. Vega, my office. Now. She extracted her arms from the machine, leaving behind 3 tools and possibly her dignity. This is it, she muttered to the carnivorous plant on her workstation. I'm getting fired for fraternizing with alien royalty. Try not to eat my replacement. The plant rustled its leaves in what she chose to interpret as sympathy. Commander Stevens waited in her office wearing an expression that suggested she'd discovered something deeply offensive in her morning reports. Sid. Sarah sat, running through potential defense strategies. Perhaps she could claim temporary insanity, gravitational field exposure, exotic pollen from the xenobotany section. I've received a formal complaint. Stevens pulled up a holographic document about your relationship with Ambassador Lyra. We don't have a relationship. Sarah said it automatically, then realized how that sounded. I mean, we're friends, we talk about science. And other things, normal things, nothing inappropriate. You've been seen together 17 times in the past 2 weeks. In laboratories, the observation deck, the hydroponics bay, and somehow the auxiliary storage area near Bay 7. That was an accident. We got lost looking for, Sarah stopped. There was no good way to finish that sentence. Look, Commander, the ambassador is interested in xenobiology. I'm a xenobiologist. We have professional conversations. At midnight, science doesn't sleep. Stevens pinched the bridge of her nose. Sarah, I've known you for 3 years. You're brilliant, dedicated, and socially awkward enough that the idea of you deliberately pursuing anyone is laughable. But this isn't about what you're doing. It's about optics. The Etherian delegation is already fractured. Half of them want this alliance. Half think humanity is too unstable to be trusted. If they believe their ambassador is compromised. She's not compromised. The words came out sharper than Sarah intended. She's brilliant and dedicated to this treaty. She works harder than anyone I've ever met. If anything, I'm the one who's compromised because she caught herself, but Stevens' expression suggested she'd heard enough. Because you care about her. Stevens said it gently. I'm not blind, Sarah. I'm also not heartless. But I am responsible for this station's stability. The negotiations are at a critical point. I need you to maintain professional distance until the treaty is signed. Professional distance. Sarah repeated the words like they were in an alien language. No more midnight meetings. No more laboratory tour. Let her do her job without distraction. Stevens deactivated the hologram. I'm sorry. I know this isn't fair. But politics rarely is. Sarah left the office feeling like she'd been gutted. She made it back to Lab 3 before the anger hit, and she immediately took it out on the gene sequencer by kicking it harder than strictly professional. Emotional outburst detected. Her assistant AI chirped helpfully. Would you like me to file a maintenance report? I'd like you to shut up, actually. She threw herself into work, analyzing samples with aggressive precision. The cells from Kepler 442b seemed to sense her mood and reorganized themselves into what looked suspiciously like a middle finger. Even her samples were mocking her. 3 hours later, the lab door opened without warning. Lyra stood there, still in formal diplomatic robes, her face carefully composed except for her eyes, which burned with something Sarah recognized as fury. I heard about the complaint. Lyra crossed the lab in 3 strides. I've spent the last hour in a screaming match with my senior advisor about appropriate conduct and diplomatic propriety. I used language that hasn't been spoken in Etherian council chambers in approximately 80 years. Lyra, they're right. Sarah kept her eyes on her samples. The treaty is more important than... Don't. Lyra's hand touched Sarah's arm and the contact made her flinch. Don't do that. Don't diminish this. I'm not. I'm being practical. Sarah finally looked up, and the expression on Lyra's face made her heart crack. You've spent 2 centuries serving your people. This treaty could save lives, prevent conflicts, create something lasting. I'm not going to be the reason it fails. And I've spent 2 centuries being what everyone needed me to be. Lyra's voice was tight with controlled emotion. Do you know what my advisor said? That I should never have come here. That someone like me, with my bloodline and responsibilities, shouldn't be exposed to humans because we're too emotional, too impulsive, too likely to corrupt proper Etherian behavior. They said you were a distraction I couldn't afford. Maybe they're right. They're absolutely wrong. Lyra moved closer, and Sarah could see the way her ears were tilted back, an Etherian expression of defiance. You didn't distract me from my duty. You reminded me why duty matters. I was negotiating this treaty like it was a chess game, moving pieces around a board. You showed me that it's about people. Flawed, messy, brilliant people who deserve better than cold political calculations. Sarah's hand stilled on the controls. What are you saying? I'm saying I went back into negotiations this afternoon and actually fought for what matters. Not just the trade agreements and defense pacts, but cultural exchange programs, scientific collaboration, student exchanges, all the things that help people understand each other instead of just tolerating each other. Lyra's smile was fierce, and when my advisor told me I was being inappropriately influenced, I told him that maybe appropriate wasn't working. Lyra, I'm 237 years old, and I've never chosen anything for myself. Every decision was about duty, about serving the collective, about being the perfect representative of my people. Lyra's hand found Sarah's, fingers interlacing with desperate certainty. But you crashed into me in a corridor, literally and metaphorically, and I realized I've been living half a life. I want more than that. I want this. Sarah felt tears threatening and fought them back. The treaty will be signed tomorrow. Lyra pulled out a data pad, displaying an official document covered in both human and Etherian script. We reached an agreement 2 hours ago. It's done. And before you ask, no, my personal feelings didn't compromise anything. If anything, they made me a better negotiator because I stopped treating this as an obligation and started treating it as an opportunity. You're telling me that accidentally groping you led to successful interstellar diplomacy. I'm saying that you reminded me what it feels like to be a person instead of a position. Lyra's other hand came up to cup Sarah's face, and Sarah leaned into the touch without thinking. I'm also saying that I've never met anyone who talks to carnivorous plants and genuinely expects them to answer. They're good listeners. You're extraordinary. Lyra said it simply, like stating a fundamental law of physics. And I've decided that after spending 2 centuries being appropriate, I'm going to be wildly inappropriate and see what happens. Sarah's laugh came out shaky. What does that mean? It means I've requested an extended assignment here. Cultural liaison position, helping implement the exchange programs. It means I'll be on the *Meridian* for at least another year. Lyra's thumb traced Sarah's cheekbone with devastating gentleness. It means I'd very much like to continue having midnight conversations in observation decks and getting lost in auxiliary storage areas. That was genuinely an accident. I know you're terrible with directions. Lyra leaned closer and Sarah forgot how to breathe. Sarah, I can't promise this will be easy. My people are going to have opinions. Your crew is going to gossip. We're going to have complications and misunderstandings, and probably several more gravity-related incidents. Sounds terrible. Absolutely awful. Lyra's forehead touched Sarah's, and the contact sent warmth flooding through her. So will you be wildly inappropriate with me? Sarah thought about the past 2 weeks, about finding someone who understood loneliness as intimately as she did, about discovering that maybe being exactly who she was could be enough, about an alien ambassador who'd spent centuries being perfect finally choosing to be real. On one condition, Sarah said, name it. Let me touch your ears, properly this time. You said they were sensitive, and I've been curious about Etherian neurobiology for weeks. Lyra's laugh was pure delight. That's your condition, scientific curiosity. I'm a xenobiologist. It's literally my job. You're impossible. Lyra guided Sarah's hand upward, and when Sarah's fingers made contact with the long, elegant curve of her ear, Lyra shivered in a way that suggested neurobiology was only part of the equation. Still like it. Sarah grinned. Yeah, I really do. They stood there in Lab 3, surrounded by humming equipment and samples that had organized themselves into vaguely encouraging shapes. And Sarah thought that maybe gravity malfunctions weren't always a disaster. Sometimes they just changed your trajectory in exactly the way you needed. The treaty would be signed. The alliance would be forged. And 2 people who'd spent too long being lonely would figure out how to be something else together. Her supervisor wasn't going to like it. The Etherian Council was definitely going to have opinions. Station gossip would be insufferable for months. Sarah found she didn't care at all.